Montana Territory, 1884. The summer sun burned high and dry as Opal Carris dragged her bucket across the warped floorboards of the Last Lantern Saloon, her knuckles raw with lie and broken pride. She had not walked into this life. She had been shoved. Her brother, Everett, once her only kin, had stolen from a poker table he had no business being near. He ran when they caught wind of it. She stayed. And when the saloon owner dragged her by the arm and spat, "You'll work off every damn dollar he took," she had nodded because there was nothing else to do. The law would not chase Everett, but it would let her rot in the saloon until the debt was gone. She had been scrubbing for 4 months now. Her skirts smelled of whiskey and sweat. Her hands blistered from soap and splinters. Her spirit held together by habit and silence. The cowboys barely saw her. They walked through her like fog, boots heavy, voices louder after sundown. But one man had noticed her, had watched her, not with the leering eyes of the drunks, but with something quiet behind his gaze. He came in every few days, sat alone, drank 1 glass of rye, and left. Today he came in just past sundown, tall and dust-covered, with a worn hat in his hand and a coat slung over one shoulder. He was not the kind who swaggered. He moved like someone who had lived through something and come out the other side quieter for it. Opal kept her eyes down, scrubbing near the bar. She had learned not to make eye contact. But he stopped beside her. "You missed a spot," he said, crouching beside her. His voice was low, not teasing. She looked up, startled. "Well, then you best keep walking. I don't need advice from a man drinking his supper." He smiled, but not with mockery. "I am not here for supper," he said, holding a slip of paper toward the barkeep. "I am here to pay off a debt." The barkeep looked over, eyes narrowing. "You Everett's friend?" "No," the man said. "Never met him, but I am paying Opal's debt. Every dollar." Opal stood too fast, rag falling from her hand. "What are you doing?" He turned to her. "Setting you free. I do not even know your name." He tipped his head slightly. "Orin Prescott." "I cannot," she shook her head. "You cannot do this for me. I already did." The barkeep counted the bills, muttered something about fools and women, and walked off. The weight of the saloon shifted. Opal felt it in her chest like a cinch had been loosened. Orin looked at her then, not like someone expecting thanks, but like a man who had done what needed doing and would not ask more of it. "You do not owe me anything," he said gently. "But if you want company, I will be sitting out back." He stepped away without waiting for her answer. She stood alone, the rag still at her feet. Her palms were trembling. Outside, the air held a trace of pine and dust. She found him behind the saloon, sitting on a crate, his coat around his shoulders even though the night was warm. "You should not have done that," she said, stepping closer. "I know." She sat beside him. "I do not understand you. Most people do not." She looked down at her hands. "It was not even my debt. I figured that." They sat there, quiet between them. A coyote howled somewhere far off. The stars blinked out above the tall pines. "Why me?" she asked finally. Orin looked at her. "Because you did not deserve to be stuck in there. And because I saw you every time I came in. And I kept thinking if I were her, I would want someone to notice." She swallowed. "That is all." He nodded. "That is all." But it was not all. He had noticed the way she never asked for help, the way she worked long after the floor was clean, the way she kept her chin up even when the barkeep barked at her. He had seen something in her, something quiet and strong. He had not meant to fall for her, but he had, without realizing it. Opal stared out at the dark trees for a while before speaking again. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "I run cattle, north mostly, toward the Judith Basin." She looked at him. "Do you have a home?" He hesitated. "I have a cabin near the big snowy mountains. Not much, but it is mine. She nodded slowly. Do you need work? He asked, almost carefully. She turned to him. Are you offering? I am. What kind of work? I could use help with the horses, and the cooking, and just someone to talk to. She smiled, small but real. So you are paying for conversation now? No. That was free. She laughed, quiet and warm, the first sound like that she had made in months. All right, she said, but I am not scrubbing any floors. He held out his hand. Deal. She hesitated, then placed her calloused hand in his. It fit. Not soft, not easy, but it fit. That night, he walked her to the boarding house where she kept her trunk, waiting while she packed the few things she had left. No one stopped her. No one tried to pull her back. In the morning, they rode out together, the sun rising behind them like a promise. And Opal realized for the first time in a long time she was free, and she was not alone. The trail east of Lewistown climbed slow through the breaks, where pine gave way to open hills burned gold in the August sun. Orin rode ahead with his hat low, letting the roan set the pace. Opal followed, keeping steady on the gelding. He'd lent her an older sorrel with a patient gait and a crooked blaze down its nose. It had been 2 days since they left town. She hadn't spoken much, and neither had he. The quiet between them wasn't strained. It felt like something being built, not something being avoided. At midday, they stopped near a spring tucked between cottonwoods. Orin unpacked biscuits and salted pork from his saddlebag and passed her a tin cup for the water. She knelt near the bank, dipping the cup with both hands. You always this quiet? He asked, sitting on a flat rock beside her. She drank before answering. Not always. Just don't know what to say when someone changes your whole life in a night. I didn't mean to make it harder. You didn't. I'm just not used to quiet that doesn't come from loneliness. He looked off toward the ridge where a hawk circled high, casting a shadow that never touched the ground. I used to talk a lot, he said finally, before I came back from the war. She didn't press him, but her gaze lingered. Orin tore a piece of biscuit and handed it to her. You got people left? None that count. Everett's blood, but he's always been a storm. I kept hoping he'd settle. He never did. He nodded. Storms don't settle. They just move on. They ate in silence after that, the wind threading through the cottonwoods like breath through cupped hands. When they mounted up again, he adjusted her stirrups without asking, quiet and efficient. That night, they camped near a meadow rimmed with tamarack. Orin gathered deadfall while she set flint to kindling. When the fire caught, she sat back on her heels, watching the flame climb. You sure you want me on your land? She asked. He tossed a branch into the fire. It's not about want. It's about right. She turned toward him, her voice low. You don't know what I've had to do to get by. He didn't flinch. I don't need to. That saloon didn't own you, and neither will I. She let the fire warm her palms. You always believe in people this easy? No, he said. But I believe in you. The words didn't come with weight or expectation. They just sat there between them, steady as the ground beneath their boots. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small book with a cracked spine. She opened it and laid it in her lap. You read? He asked. Only thing I took when I left home. It used to be my mother's. Poems. He leaned back against a pine trunk, one knee bent. Read me one. She hesitated, then turned a few pages. Her voice was quiet but sure as she read. When she finished, she looked up. He was watching her, not the fire. That was good, he said. She used to read them to me when it rained. You miss her. Every day. He didn't ask more, just nodded and pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders. That night, after the fire burned low, she laid down a few feet from him, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her. The stars above blinked steady, and the grass whispered beneath them. Before sleep took her, she whispered, "Thank you, Orin." He didn't answer right away, but she heard the warmth in his voice when he did. "You're welcome, Opal." The cabin stood low against a slope thick with lodgepole pine, its timber darkened from rain and years. Orin tied off the horses beneath a lean-to and stepped aside so Opal could take the last few yards up to the porch on her own. She didn't rush. The air smelled of dry grass and wood smoke, and something in her slowed to match it. He pushed the door open. "It's plain," he said, "but it holds heat and keeps dry." Inside, the walls were chinked tight, the hearth swept clean. A cot sat beneath the window, another against the far wall. A table held a lantern, half a loaf of bread, and a tin pot with the lid askew. Opal set her small trunk near the door and ran her fingers along the edge of the table. "You built this yourself?" "Most of it. Neighbor helped raise the roof beams. Rest I finished between drives." She stepped to the hearth and crouched. "Stones set well. Won't smoke." That was the third try. She glanced back at him, her mouth curving slightly. "I can cook, if you've got flour and a pan that doesn't burn through. There's a skillet in the cupboard. Lard too." He stepped outside to fetch the saddlebags, and she listened to the creak of leather and the soft clop of hooves as he led the horses toward the corral. She unrolled her bedding on the cot beneath the window and ran a cloth over the sill, clearing away a fine layer of dust. When Orin came back in, he held a covered tin box. "Brought this from town. Figured you might want something that wasn't hardtack." She lifted the lid. Inside were dried apples, still golden at the edges. She looked up at him. "I haven't tasted these since before Ma passed." He didn't answer, just set the box on the table and lit the lantern. As she worked over the fire, he pulled a chair near the window and sat with his back straight, hands resting on his knees. She glanced over her shoulder once, then again after some minutes. "You always sit that still?" "Only when I don't want to startle something." "Am I something?" He looked at her. "You've been through more than you speak of. I figure I'd best not rush you." She pulled the pan from the coals and set 2 biscuits on a plate. "You think careful for a cattleman. I lost enough to learn slow better." She handed him a plate. "You lose family?" He took it, eyes steady. "A brother. Same war I came back from." She didn't say anything right away. The fire popped, and the wind shifted outside, brushing the shutters. "My mother got sick when I was 16. Everett was already gone half the time, chasing cards. She passed before the year turned. I buried her myself." He looked down at the biscuit in his hands. "You were alone a long time. I got used to silence." They ate in quiet after that, the kind that didn't weigh heavy. When the plates were scraped clean, she stood and dipped the pan in warm water. He rose and took the towel from its hook, drying without being asked. "You ever think about marrying?" she asked, not looking at him. "Once." She turned to face him, waiting. "She died before it happened. Fever took her that spring." Opal folded the towel once, then again. "You don't talk like a man carrying bitterness." He set the towel down. "I carry it. I just don't let it drive." The lantern flickered low, casting long shadows across the floor. She stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "I'm not sure what I'm meant to be anymore," she said. "Not a saloon girl. Not just someone's sister." "You're Opal," he said. "That's enough." He didn't reach for her, just stood there, close enough she could feel the warmth off his coat. She looked up at him. "I don't want to be beholden to anybody. You're not. And I don't want pity. I wouldn't offer it." She let out a breath, slow and even. "Then maybe I could stay." He nodded once. "You already did." She stepped back, brushing her fingers against the edge of the table. "There's seed in the bag by the door." he said. I meant to start a garden last spring, but the calves came early. I'll start it after the next rain. You can choose where it goes. She met his eyes then, and he didn't look away. That night, she lay in the cot beneath the window, listening to the wind move through the pines outside. Across the room, Orin's breathing was even, steady. The fire had burned down to coals, and the room held the hush of a place that had not known a woman's voice in some time. Opal turned her face to the window, the stars above sharp and cold. She didn't feel lost anymore, not claimed, not owned but seen. And that, she knew, was the beginning of something she hadn't dared hope for in a long, long time. By late September, the wind rolled down out of the mountains with a bite that meant the first snow wasn't far off. The mornings came crisp, and the sunlight slanted lower each day, catching in the yellowing cottonwoods near the creek. Opal stood ankle-deep among the furrows behind the cabin, her apron damp with soil, fingers stained from pulling what was left of the season's onions. She set each bulb into the basket carefully, brushing dirt from the roots with the edge of her sleeve. The last rows had gone thin and pale in the colder nights, but they'd keep well hung in the root cellar. When Orin's boots creaked behind her, she didn't look up. If you're come to say I've missed a few, I'll hand you the basket and let you finish it. I came to ask if you'd ride with me up past the ridge, he said. I've a line of fence there that needs checking. She straightened, brushing her hands on her apron. All right, long as it doesn't turn into another full day of hauling wire. He lifted the corner of his mouth. Just need another set of eyes. Not rope burns. The horses were already saddled, and they rode out without much talk, the air so still it seemed to listen. They followed the trail through a stand of tamarack, the needles already turning gold. When they reached the higher ground, the land opened to long slopes of grass and scattered rock. The valley below folded in soft layers of ochre and green. Orin dismounted near the fence line and crouched beside a post leaning eastward. Elk must have come through, he said, measuring the drag marks near the wire. Opal stayed seated, reins loose in her hand. You ever think about selling off a few acres? That bottom stretch by the creek could hold a second pasture. He looked up at her. Thought about it. Never had anyone to help me think it through. She dismounted and stepped beside him. Well, you do now. They finished the fence work in quiet rhythm, Orin hammering in a new brace while she held it steady, her hands firm and sure. The sun dipped lower as they worked, shadows stretching long across the ridge. When they mounted again, they didn't turn back toward the cabin. Orin led them higher, up a game trail that narrowed between boulders and opened onto a ledge overlooking the valley. She pulled her horse to a halt beside his. Below them, the land rolled out in soft patchwork, the creek winding silver through the grass, the cabin small and square at the edge of the pines. I used to bring my brother up to places like this, she said, her voice low. Before he got older, he'd throw rocks and pretend he was hunting buffalo. Orin looked out over the valley. Did you ever want to leave Montana? She thought a while before answering. I wanted to leave what I was stuck in, but not the land. Not this. He nodded once. Same. A hawk passed overhead, its cry sharp and short against the hush. Opal leaned slightly forward in the saddle, gaze steady on the horizon. You planning to stay through winter? I always do. I mean with me here. He turned toward her slowly. I wouldn't have asked you to come if I didn't mean for it to be permanent. She met his eyes, something unreadable flickering across her face before it settled into calm. Then maybe we ought to build something better than 2 cots and a skillet. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he dismounted and stepped to her side, offering his hand. She took it, letting him help her down even though she didn't need it. They stood together on the ledge, shoulder to shoulder, watching the wind stir the grass far below. I don't expect it to be easy, she said. I've been too many things to wear any of them lightly. I don't want easy, he said. I want the truth, and time, and you. She looked at him then, really looked, and what she saw made her reach out, resting her hand against his chest. I reckon I could give you all three, but I'd want the same in return. Then it's settled. They rode back in the slanting dusk, the horses moving slow and steady along the trail. When they reached the cabin, she didn't go to her cot. She set her hand on his arm and said, I'll need a better place for my things, and more hooks by the stove. He nodded. I'll build them tomorrow. That night, the fire burned long, and they stayed close without words. The space between them gone quiet in a different way than before, not out of distance, but understanding. And when she laid her hand in his without hesitation, he didn't speak. He only held it and didn't let go. By mid-October, frost slicked the cabin roof each morning, and the creek behind the barn ran slower, edged with pale ice that cracked under the weight of a boot. Orin had taken to rising before the sun to bring in wood, and Opal learned the rhythm of the stove's draft fast enough to keep the coffee from boiling over. Neither of them said much in the mornings, but there was a comfort in the quiet, the kind that settled in the bones and stayed put. One afternoon, as the last of the calves were driven into the foothill pasture, Orin brushed the dust from his sleeves and leaned against the corral rail. Opal stood nearby, arms folded against the chill, watching the younger heifer nose at the gate latch. She's clever, she said. Watched me unhook it twice yesterday. She won't get far even if she does. Fence runs clean down to the ravine. Still, I don't like animals that think too hard. He chuckled low in his throat. You planning to hold that against her? I might. Depends if she learns to open it or not. He looked over at her, eyes narrowing slightly. You seem lighter today. I had a letter. He straightened, surprised. From who? Marshall's office out of Bismarck. Said they picked Everett up near the river trading stolen goods. He's set for 6 years in a Dakota prison. Orin didn't speak right away. He watched the heifer chew cud while the wind tugged at the ends of Opal's braid. How do you feel? I thought I'd cry, she said, voice even. Turns out I just feel finished. She didn't look at him, only watched the animals settle into the hay. I ain't glad he's locked up, but I'm glad I don't have to wait for him anymore. Don't have to wonder if I'll hear he's dead or if he'll come knocking again. You don't owe him anything. She turned to him then, slower than usual, her hands still tucked in the crook of her elbows. No, I don't. I know that now. He stepped closer, boots scuffing the dirt. You still thinking of staying through winter? I'm thinking of staying through everything. He reached out, brushing a bit of hay from her sleeve but leaving his hand there just a moment longer than he needed to. Then maybe it's time we talked about what that means. She nodded. I wondered if you'd ever ask. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to. I want you to, she said. But not as someone who saved me. Not as someone I owe. I never thought you did. I know that now, too. That night, she cleared the table after supper while Orin sat on the cabin step, carving a new handle for the draw knife. When she came out to join him, she held something wrapped in a folded scrap of muslin. I made this for you, she said, sitting beside him. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a wool scarf, stitched tight and even. The color was a deep brown, matching the tone of his coat. I didn't have much yarn, she said, but it should last. He ran a thumb over the edge. It's the first thing someone's made for me in near 15 years. Well, she said, drawing her knees up, I figured it was time someone did. When he leaned in, it wasn't sudden. They had been moving toward each other for weeks, in 1,000 unspoken ways. His mouth brushed hers like he wasn't sure he had the right, but she didn't hesitate. She kissed him back with quiet certainty. her hand sliding into his without needing to be guided. Later, when the lantern burned low and the wind rattled the shutters, they lay close beneath the same quilt, her head tucked against the space where his shoulder met his chest. No words, none needed. As November set in, they fell into a rhythm that belonged only to them. They built shelves together and filled them with jars of beans and dried apples. Opal stitched new curtains from old flour sacks, and Orin strung up fresh lines of cedar to keep mice from the winter stores. They planned a chicken coop for spring and decided to take in a neighbor boy to help with branding come March. One morning, when the snow lay clean across the pasture and the chimney smoked steady, Orin knelt beside the hearth with something small in his hand, a ring made from a spoon handle, polished smooth and bent careful to fit. "I don't have a preacher," he said, "but I've got the rest of my life if you want it." Opal didn't blink, didn't ask for a moment to think. She slid the ring onto her finger and said, "I already do." They married themselves under the cottonwoods, just before the first real storm rolled in. No guests, no papers. Just a promise spoken plain and true beside the frozen creek. Years passed quiet and steady. The cabin grew fuller, not just with things, but with life. A child came, red-faced and squalling, born one spring morning while the first thaw dripped from the eaves. Opal named her May, after her mother, and Orin carved her name into the lintel above the door. They never left Montana, never needed to. And when they sat on the porch in the last light of evening, watching their daughter chase chickens across the yard, Opal would sometimes lean her head against Orin's shoulder and say, "I never thought I'd be this happy." And he would answer, always the same, "You were meant for it. You just had to find your place." And she had. With him.